Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the September Committee of Children and Learning. I would remind you that it's been recorded and live streamed, and people who are online should remain mute until they're asked to speak. Do we have any apologies or substitutes?
Yes, Convener, we have apologies from Councillors Shepherd, Beattie, Bell, Proctor and Wan, with Councillors Boyd, Clark, Cheap, Fotheringham and McLaren substituting. There's also apologies from Mr Callaghan and Mrs Cheen.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest or statements of transparency? Councillor Meakin.
Declaration of interest for item 5 relating to kinship and foster carers. As a kinship carer, I won't take part. Excuse me, I won't take part and I'll leave the room.
Right, thank you very much. And can we agree number? Oh, sorry, Councillor Cheap.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, it's just more of a statement of transparency. I need to or not, but for clarity, I will. My wife is a primary teacher of ASN at Carlogie Primary School in Carnoustie.
Okay, thank you very much. You're staying for any discussion? Okay.
Yes, I will.
Right, agenda item number 3. Can we have agreement for the minute of the last meeting? Thank you. So we're going on to number 4, which is the Angus Education Report 22-23 and update of Angus Education Plan 22-27. This is a long report, and at our director, Kelly McIntosh's suggestion, she has brought in some members of her staff on both sides here who will highlight areas that they are particularly responsible for. I think that will make it livelier for us because it is a long report. Really interesting report, I think, however. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Kelly just now to introduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. So agenda item 4 includes 3 appendices: the Angus Education Report for 22-23, the 23-24 update of the 5-year education plan, and the Education and Lifelong Learning Performance Report. Appendix 1, our education report, lists each of the priorities from the 22-23 education plan and provides some narrative detailing the progress that we made towards realising these priorities. For each of the priorities, we also indicate whether that work continues into the education plan for this year or has now been moved and held in service level plans. Appendix 2 is the 23-24 update to the Angus Education Plan, and you will see that we once again present our priorities under the themes of Angus Cares, Angus Learns and Angus Improves. Direct alignment with the priorities of Angus Council as a whole can be seen in our continued commitment to ensuring that the education and lifelong workforce is trauma skilled, our continued commitment to developing our workforce and in particular with their leadership, and the inclusion of a focus on the climate emergency in our wider work on the curriculum. The focus on the climate emergency is part of Target 2030, Scotland's Learning for Sustainability Action Plan, and the focus on anti-racist education and building racial literacy show how we have sought to align our education plan with national priorities. So I hope they have managed to draw the fact that we look to Angus and to national policy to help us write our plan. You will see our continued focus on attendance and the inclusion of greater scrutiny of the progress and learning of our care experienced children and young people and those with additional support needs. In particular, we are prioritising scrutiny around the use of reduced timetables and appropriate accreditation which better captures all learning. Our Directorate Scorecard lists the Scottish Government's core stretch aims, with our 3-year trajectory and final stretch aim providing ambitious targets for our teachers and leaders. Appendix 3, the Education and Lifelong Learning Performance Report, provides data and analysis of these core stretch aims and other measures which are a priority for Angus. When reviewing this appendix, it is important to remember that whilst individual data sets can provide an indication of performance, any data set should be considered together with other information for the purpose of self-evaluation and improvement planning. Before we hear from you with your questions and your comments, I have asked each of our senior officers to provide some additional information to highlight some of the significant pieces of work that they were leading last year. Neil Loudon will begin by providing information on the review of early years and the work of the Angus Virtual School. Then Audrey Osborne will speak about the review of additional support needs that began last year. Jim Hammond will cover the work ongoing on our review of the curriculum, and Beth Reader will provide an overview of our use of the Scottish Attainment Challenge funding to improve attendance. The officers will be happy to take questions once they have provided their updates. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the staff in all of our settings, our children, young people and families, and our many partners for helping make our learning centres and schools vibrant learning communities. Thanks very much, and I'd like to pass over to Neil Loudon.
Yes.
Could I possibly ask if officers have any participation?
Will that be possible?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, members. I'm currently looking at page 23, which is around, first of all, improving the quality of care and learning in the early years. Just for context, we would always review the quality of learning and care in the early years, and it was obviously paused during the pandemic. And coming back, we're looking at our approach around 1140 and the delivery models also. The quality of early learning and childcare is something we're very proud of in Angus. We continually refine our approaches and offer professional learning to all settings, both local authority settings, of course, and our partner providers, to ensure our workforce is knowledgeable, skilled, delivering consistently high levels of experiences for all our children. This is perhaps best reflected in our Care Inspector and HMIE reports from last year, where 98% or more of our quality indicator grades sit at good or very good, some at excellent, and a year-on-year increase from post-pandemic of 8% on our grading. So that's something that we're really proud of and showcases the work. In addition, and as part of a formal review process last year, we consulted and implemented the role of lead seniors in all of our local authority ELC settings, which provide extended hours and those with 40 children or more. And that was a large piece of work last year. The only exception is with our standalone ELC settings. They currently have managers and deputy managers. This role is intended to support the school management team in the operational management of the setting, but perhaps most importantly, providing career pathways for our early learning and childcare staff. Consultation demonstrated that the majority of our workforce thought that the lead senior roles would be beneficial to them as individuals and their own continuous professional development. So the review team engaged in the development of the remit for this role, and in addition, the review also implemented peripatetic senior early years practitioners' roles in our smaller settings of between 8 and 16, 2 or 3 days a week, respectively. Across Angus Learns and Improves, and in fact across Angus Cares Learns and Improves, our Angus Virtual School works tirelessly to ensure continuous improvement in our settings. We developed a three-pronged approach to supporting and challenging the improvement activities in our schools. The Angus Virtual School has developed last session and continues to develop a moderation toolkit which has received national recognition, and this in turn supports our teachers in their judgments on attainment of curriculum levels across the broad general education. The judgments made by teachers now are entered into our pupil tracking system with the progress and learning profile that the director mentioned of the school, and identified targeted groups of young people are discussed at every single meeting. This process for me, demonstrates our commitment to continuous self-evaluation for self-improvement in all of our Angus ELC settings and schools. We continually refine our offer in line with local and national priorities and are data-led by all our schools where we target our finite resource. Our virtual school offers and continues to offer locally with our colleagues across the Tayside Regional Improvement Collaborative in Dundee and Perth supports, and this ensures that our Angus profile remains consistently high, both locally across our Regional Improvement Collaborative and nationally. So, Convener, thank you for the opportunity to showcase some of our work for our early learning and childcare and our Angus Virtual School, and happy to take questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Neil. Are there any questions? No. Right, well, we will then move on to Audrey Osborne. Audrey, thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'll be covering from pages 17 in the report. In June 2020, the National Review of Additional Support for Learning by Angela Morgan stated that 30.9% of our school-age population in Scotland has an additional support need. The Scottish Government's annual pupil census for 2022 reported that 34.2% of learners in Scottish schools now has an additional support need. So that means that in a class of 27, there would be an average of 9 learners who would have an additional need. This increase in number and complexity of need is reflected locally in Angus. Over the past 5 years, the greatest increase has been in mental health, social emotional needs, behaviours that challenge and interrupted learning. Perhaps not surprising given the impact of the pandemic. Whilst all of our staff in Angus work incredibly hard to meet the needs of individual and young people, our biggest challenge, especially at secondary stage, is complex needs arising from autism. It's in this context of increased need that support, equity and inclusion were identified as themes for a review of our ASN service. The review is a priority within Angus Education Plan, with Phase 1 having been carried out last session and Phase 2 this session. The purpose of the review was to determine if our current model of ASN support was meeting identified need in Angus efficiently and effectively, supporting children, young people and families through universal to targeted intervention, supporting the participation, progress and achievement of children and young people with additional support needs, and supporting inclusion in our schools. The first phase of the ASN review, undertaken between September 2022 and June 2023, focused specifically on the ASN locality and specialist teams and their delivery of services to children, families, schools and partners in Angus. An ASN planning group was established involving 22 stakeholders, including head teachers, deputies, principal teachers, ASN teachers, school and pupil support assistants, allied health professionals, Education Scotland and union representatives. Subgroups were then established, which included members of the Scottish Youth Parliament. The methodology of a review involved the development of a range of questionnaires issued to school staff who had knowledge and experience of using our ASN services, parents, carers of children who were known to our service, children and young people with additional support needs who had been involved with our services, and partners with whom we work regularly to support children and young people in Angus. Whilst the involvement of the ASN service is valued and appreciated by children, parents, staff and partners, emerging themes for improvement were investigated further through a range of focus groups. These themes included the nature and support from the ASN locality and specialist teams, clear and accessible information on the roles and responsibilities of the different teams, streamlining access to support, resources including staffing and information by reducing bureaucracy, further professional learning opportunities at universal, targeted and intensive levels, and greater communication and collaboration with parents and carers. Increased efforts will be made to engage more with parents in the next phase of the review, which is looking at inclusion in our schools, specifically the presence, participation and achievement of our children and young people with additional support needs. In addition to reviewing inclusion and in response to feedback from the review thus far, the ASN service will be taking forward the following priorities within the education plan this session. Strengthening our universal offer and supporting inclusion through the use of the Circle framework, which focuses on inclusive environments and participation of learners. investing in workforce development through a programme of induction and training for support staff, promoting university qualifications in inclusive practice and autism for teachers, promoting trauma-skilled practice training for all education staff, and providing GIRFEC training for education staff and multi-agency partners. We'll also be addressing emotionally based school avoidance and the impact on attendance through establishing guidance and training from our educational psychology service, and identifying a continuum of support and provision to meet the continuum of need in Angus, including the offer from our ASN teams and the role of Pan Bride. We need to ensure that the achievements of young people with additional support needs are appropriately accredited by ensuring that they are on the correct learning or flexible pathway. Thank you. Any questions?
Well, that was quite a lot to take in, wasn't it? Councillor Whiteside.
Thank you, Audrey. I was quite interested in the section on emotionally based school avoidance and the pilot that's taking place at Brecon and Monifeith. Is that going to be extended to other schools, and was there a particular reason why those schools were involved in the pilot in the first place?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Whiteside. We were looking at following kind of post-COVID, if you like, mental health issues, and anxiety seemed to be high for lots of children and young people getting back into school, understandably. So we looked at the data for the schools and, where would be best placed to look at the pilot. So this is a national issue, and educational psychology services across Scotland are looking at emotionally based school avoidance. So that's the reason for our psychology service. We'll take the learning from the pilot areas and then roll that out to other areas as appropriate.
Any other questions? Oh, Councillor Speed, and then Councillor Lee.
Yep, thanks. It was noticed in our last budget. Sorry, that's better. I think it was quite useful. It was highlighted in the last budget that there would be an increase in class sizes, and just looking at that kind of stat against the increase in additional support needs, and the ratio within classes, where I think you gave the ratio of for 27 there was perhaps additional support need. I just wondered how much impact increase in class sizes is having on pupils' attainment and their ability to stay within the class setting, and also what work is being done to try and increase that engagement with regards to the ASN ongoing review.
Thank you, Councillor Speed. I think I would say with confidence that our schools look at the individual needs of our children with additional support needs and plan that accordingly. So, dependent on what support they get. Part of the circle framework that we're promoting is to look at having more inclusive environments in our mainstream classes and increase the participation, but only where that's meaningful for our children and young people. So it's not taken away from the support that each individual child or young person would require. And in relation to engagement, we did have follow-up focus groups to our questionnaires that were sent out, and parents and carers were involved in that. And I think the face-to-face contact perhaps yields more results in terms of engaging people rather than just being survey-based. So we'll certainly have a look at our methodology moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? For Audrey, I mean, you can ask questions at the end, obviously, but no. Okay, move on to Jim Hammond now.
Thank you, Convener. Just by introduction, I'll provide a little bit of context to why the priority was included within the plan. So in 2021-22, a review of our education offer was prompted by the publication of an engagement with Professor Ken Muir's consultation and report, Putting Learners at the Centre. This led to discussion with school leaders, reviewed data and practices, which resulted in curriculum being a priority in this year's plan. Before we look at how we got on with the plan, it's important to consider what we mean by curriculum. Rather than simply the various subject areas, the Curriculum for Excellence describes curriculum as the totality of all that is planned. So in addition to the curriculum areas and subject, it includes the ethos and life of the school and community, and how the values are brought to life, opportunities for personal achievement, and consideration of how learning will be delivered and assessed. Any curriculum must also focus on learner entitlements. So when we say curriculum, sometimes it feels like quite a discrete area, but it's all-encompassing and really captures our offer that young people in our school experience. The first phase of the curriculum review is complete. In partnership with the University of Dundee, this research focused on the lived experience of the curriculum through the lens of children, teachers and parents. In September 2022, more than 50 teachers from both primary and secondary sectors participated in individual interviews. In January of this year, all parents and carers were invited to complete a questionnaire, and also in January, focus groups of children involving children and young people across a range of stages were held. And Dundee University will provide a report in November, and this report will allow us to shape our offer and devise a toolkit to help schools with their self-evaluation around curriculum. As part of the review of the secondary curriculum, senior leaders from all secondary schools and colleagues from Dundee and Angus College have worked together. The initial meeting resulted in the development of consortium arrangement for the delivery of advanced higher courses, and this has commenced in August of this year and will help reduce inefficiencies in timetables due to low uptake of courses and address equity of provision between schools. Further work of the curriculum continued through engagement with the national discussion and professional learning activities with senior leaders from all schools. This phase of the review focused on defining learner entitlements, and the outcomes of this initial work, together with a focus on building racial literacy and recommendations published in Target 2030, will inform the next stages of this work. We also reviewed specific areas for the curriculum. That was easy for me to say. Building upon the comprehensive review of relationships, sexual health and parenting, we looked at the wider personal, social and education curriculum, often known as PSE. Supported by Education Scotland, curriculum leads from each school cluster shared their current PSE programmes and worked together to agree a more consistent and progressive learning pathway for all P7 and S1 learners. That's an important stage of a young people's school career, that moving from primary to secondary sector. So to get that right, really, really important for us. This has resulted in a clear plan for each cluster based on core expectations of the PSE curriculum, whilst taking into consideration the specific needs of learners in all 8 clusters. You've picked up through the narrative there that an important partner with us is Dundee and Angus College. So in partnership with D&A College, we've a specific learner pathway for young people facing barriers to engaging with existing school offer was developed. This pathway is designed to support young people into successful transitions into further education, employment or training. 12 young people have now started this course at D&A and the uptake has been good. Last session's work was rigorously evaluated, picking up on the processes that Mr Loudon described here, and school improvement plans were reviewed and national policy drivers considered. As a result of this work, the curriculum continues in this year's annual plan under the following areas. So we're going to complete the review of learner entitlements, which we started last session. There will be a review of the broad general education, which is really from the early years right the way through to S3, with a particular focus on literacy. And this reflects areas of improvement highlighted in our BGE data and identified through schools' standards and qualities reports submitted by our head teachers. So these reports really reflect on the year's work and their improvement plans, a bit like our plan we're presenting today. We've got a review of anti-racist education, and this is a current national policy driver, and Angus is one of 4 LA's local authorities to be leading on this at the current time. And there's a review of learning for sustainability as planned across the curriculum. This stems from the publication of the Target 2030 document, which is a blueprint for embedding learning for sustainability in all our schools. This builds upon the views of young people captured in the national discussion who felt there needs to be a greater focus on climate emergency in the curriculum. And as Kelly's already outlined, this aligns with Angus Council commitment to move to a net zero, reducing our carbon footprint. The document referenced at the very start, Putting Learners at the Centre report, prompted two further consultations: the National Discussion on Education and the Hayward Review, or commonly known as the Hayward Review, looking at assessments and qualifications in the senior phase, so that's S4 to S5, S6 pupils. The outcomes of these consultations were published in May and June, respectively, of this year. The Hayward report, It's Our Future, the independent review of qualifications and assessments, has a range of recommendations, but will be really far-reaching for the work of our schools and will be a feature of our 24-25 plan, so looking a year ahead. So our work is ever-evolving and continues at pace. Thank you, Convener, for this opportunity to present that information.
Thanks very much, Jim. Do we have any questions? Councillor Melville.
Yes, thanks, Convener, and thanks for that very detailed update. It was so on page 22 when you mentioned the consortium arrangement about the advanced hires. Obviously, that's just commenced very recently, but I wondered if you could give us a bit of a narration of how that's going in terms of uptake and the kind of subjects that are involved.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Melville. The offer was less than we'd imagined. All 8 schools had been working together, and it was geographically paired initially. So obviously Carnoustie and Monteith were national partners, Forfar and Kerry were national partners in that, and Montrose and Brechin, and the 2 Arbroath schools. There had been movement across schools. We've had young people from Arbroath uptaking subjects in Carnoustie, with maths being a particular subject area. It's a building offer. It will grow further again this year, so uptake is lower than we'd hoped. So don't have the exact figures to hand, but happy to provide that. Just of note, our head teachers are already in discussions about what other subjects could be taken at the current time, and looking to expand that across other areas, including hires. But to answer specifically around your question, it's been mainly around maths, areas of social subjects such as modern studies, and modern languages have been the main areas of focus so far. Thank you.
No more questions for Jim? Okay, so we'll move on to Beth Reader now. Beth.
Thank you, Convener. In 2022, the Scottish Government launched the refreshed Scottish Attainment Challenge, and the overall mission of the SAC is to use education to improve outcomes for children and young people impacted by poverty, with a focus on the poverty-related attainment gap. As part of this programme, Angus Council will receive an allocation of strategic equity funding over 4 years, and in 22-23, we were allocated approximately $221,000 to use within the financial year. The Framework for Recovery and Accelerating Progress supports the overall SAC and was also launched in 2022. The document reinforces our commitment to achieving equity in education, and it requires local authorities to set their stretch aims for achieving the mission of the SAC. Those stretch aims are detailed in our plan. Within the framework, there is an expectation that stretch aims will include plans to address the attainment gap for those children and young people living in SIMD quintiles 1 and 5. In Angus, most of our children and young people live in SIMD quintiles 2 to 4. Some secondary schools have no young people in either quintile 1 or 5, and to address this, we are developing a range of alternative measures using the school clothing grant entitlement as a proxy. This provides us with a more robust comparison across our whole population. In 22-23, the initial allocation of strategic equity funding has been used in a range of ways aligned to addressing the impact of the poverty-related attainment gap. One area has been supporting the continued implementation of a system for tracking progress in learning for all 2 to 18-year-olds. By using the funding, we continue to have a dedicated project officer who has led on system development and a comprehensive training package for primary school leaders. The tracking system allows us to analyse data in a range of ways, including looking at SIMD and school clothing grant entitlement, to give us an enhanced overview of the impact of poverty and of any interventions that are being put in place at an individual level. Information from this tracking tool will support us in the identification and refinement of our stretch aims for literacy, numeracy and senior phase, but more importantly, allows us to see the progress in learning for all of our children and young people. In 22-23, our health and wellbeing stretch aim was to increase attendance with a focus on increasing the proportion of care experienced learners attending school more than 80% of the time, and increasing overall attendance in the Arbroath North and Brecon clusters by 2%. These decisions were informed by our analysis of attendance data across Angus, which showed gaps in these areas, and also a consideration of the impact of poverty in those areas. We have invested strategic equity funding to support the stretch aim by establishing a small team of engagement officers as a test of change. The 4 EOs are working on a targeted basis with individual children and young people with low levels of attendance and engagement in learning. A total of 40 children and young people engaged with the service in 22-23. Work is being progressed with these learners on a whole family basis where appropriate, including opportunities for family learning. The EOs are working with a range of partners, including health and third sector agencies, to provide the most appropriate interventions for children and young people accessing the service. This has included engagement during school holidays as well as term time, and interventions have also included exploring the use of individual learning pathways for young people at secondary school, such as participation in the John Muir Award. And in addition, we are also providing opportunities for younger children to access after-school activities. The availability of specific funding for care experienced children and young people has also enabled a close partnership with our colleagues in social work to develop this offer for targeted individuals. An initial evaluation of the service has been carried out, and most children and young people completing the evaluation agreed that their EO helps them to feel safe and supported in school and to attend and engage more. Initial data analysis indicates a positive impact on school attendance for those receiving this intervention. Investment in the service continues in 23-24. An additional resource worker post has been established to provide engagement support across all clusters. The focus of this role is to provide links to partner agencies and to signpost to resources rather than supporting individual learners. Other schools are also looking to employ their own EOs funded through pupil equity funding. Our established EO team will continue to work on a targeted basis, informed by data analysis and aligned to the mission of the SAC in addressing the poverty-related attainment gap. Whilst our initial data is promising, the delay in recruiting to these posts means that we do not have data yet for a full school year. If this data is positive, we may explore recruiting to additional posts. However, the service will continue to be targeted towards those most impacted by poverty. Any recruitment would also be contingent on the availability of suitably skilled individuals. Finally, on the EOs, they work very closely with those undertaking the named person role in our school and in our use of the continuum of need approach. Increasing school attendance across the whole of Angus remains our health and wellbeing stretch aim. Later in 2023, we'll see the publication of nationally comparable data for attendance, which we will analyse and potentially use to refine our stretch aims. A review of local attendance data for 22-23 indicates that secondary school learners who are looked after at home have the lowest attendance of all cohorts. In this year, the EO team will continue to work with those learners on a targeted basis, working towards our stretch aim of improving the proportion who attend school more than 90% of the time by 2027. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Beth. A really important area to be focusing in on at this time. Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you, Convener. And Beth, my apologies if I didn't catch what you said, but I'm only a sub at this committee now and again. The EOs, are they to be, now that's excellent when you see the percentages that it's gone up in a short space of time. Are these permanent posts that will continue into financial years, or I think you did say an additional one?
Convener, take that one. Thank you, Councillor Thornham. Scottish Attainment Challenge Fund is temporary funding currently, so it runs to the end of financial year 25-26. So our plan would be that we run the posts currently for the length of the funding. And as Beth says, it may be possible to scale up across some other areas where the data is telling us, but the funding is only committed to the end of the school session 25-26.
Councillor Cheap.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I think it's picking up also on what Councillor Fotheringham was just mentioned, my interest was reading about the engagement officers, and it's good to hear that they're having an impact. But I note that's primarily in North Arbroath and Brechin. And my general question here is just on bearing in mind the 4 engagement officers, and they seem to be engaged with 40 children. It's really a question, I guess, for Beth. Was that expectation to be more than that? Because 1 to 10 ratio seems quite low to me, but I'm not really in the know, as you know. But would you have expected, or were you hoping for more engagement than that, or do you hope for more engagement than that? Because I say it seems quite low.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Cheap. The young people, children and young people accessing the service, it's a targeted service, so they've been identified to work with those specific engagement officers. So the uptake as such is as we expected it to be, because they are the young people we identified for that service.
Okay, but can I just come back a little?
Yes, come back.
Yeah, it was just because I just wondered if that was your expectation of the numbers of children to be, I say, engaged by 4 engagement officers. I wondered if you might have expected more, or do you feel that that's the right ratio? That's all I'm asking.
Kelly's going to take that.
Thank you, Councillor Cheap. And I think just to highlight the role that the engagement officers might take, and this is not attributed to any single child that we are supporting, but it's just a generalisation. Some of our young people need help with getting to school in the morning. So perhaps their home would be visited, or the children would be met and walked to school, and then they need supported once they are in the building. So to settle into the day. Some children might need support at certain times in the day. And I don't mean in the classroom, I mean just with being in the building. And again, work is done with the family to help those routines. So I know that 1 to 10 seems like not many children are being worked with, but I think the needs of these children and the support that they require can be great. And once the family is helped, that's why we mention using a whole family support method. Once the family is helped, as well as the young person, then we would hope that the officers may be able to work with more children as the attendance of the children they're working with at the moment improves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Thanks.
Councillor Speed?
Yeah, I think my kind of thoughts and question was just kind of as a follow-up to what Kelly's just said there, because I was thinking around, obviously, the increase in attendance, which is noted in some areas in the younger children. But I just wondered, you mentioned there it is quite complex, and it is just an achievement even getting some young people to school. And I just wondered if there is then the staff and resources, because although they're in school, and that might then show on our statistics, I guess it doesn't necessarily mean that they're in class or that they're engaging in activity that's meaningful. But like I say, I'm not taking away from the fact it's an achievement for them perhaps to even get to school that day. But is there enough resources then to support them once they're in the school setting, to then get them either into a small group setting or just engaging in a kind of meaningful piece of work that's right for them?
Thanks, Councillor Speed. And I think Audrey mentioned earlier, you know, the staff in our schools are planning for need on an individual basis with children. And so if a young person's attendance is incredibly low, and to be clear, some of our young people's attendance is incredibly low, much lower than you might on an individual basis, the expectation would of course not be that they come in and go to all of their classes in the secondary, because that would be setting them up to fail. So there would be an individual child's plan perhaps, but certainly the continuum of need process would have been followed with the child as part of that process. And I think that's the really important bit about this. So in my eyes, the EOs are not only helping them get into it, but they're acting in an advocacy role in some way. They're helping the children have their own voice be heard. And it is about very careful planning to ensure that children are successful, because you're right, being present at school is one thing, but being present and actively participating is something else. And that's what we're aiming for. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. I think for quite a lot of us, it's really quite difficult to understand just how damaged some children have been, especially by COVID, and not being at school and coming back has been very, very difficult for them. So I absolutely welcome this. Councillor Brace.
Yes, just thanks, convener. Just coming out of that that little question and answer there. I'm wondering, do we expect to see much great? You know, we're saying there it's a remarkable achievement for some children just being at school. Do we expect that picture to change through our greater emphasis on early years learning?
One of the things that we can count on with the increase in numbers of children entering our early years settings is that we will know our children better before they enter primary one. We will know whether they have need, because we will be seeing it for ourselves or with our partner providers. So the need will be addressed earlier, and they will get to know the staff that they will be working with, and we will get to know the families. So in the long term, I would sit here and say that what's important to us, and I've said this before in this meeting, it's the value that we add every progress and learning of a young person's journey. And I honestly believe that the value that we offer in early years, as Neil mentioned earlier, and it's evident in the HMIE reports, we seem to be doing a good job there, and that's been endorsed by HMIE. So, yeah, my answer ultimately is yes, I do see it. However, I think we have to be at certain points in children and young people's lives. Things out with our control will affect them, and they will deal with that in different ways, and the best thing we can do is to support every individual as that happens in the best way that we can. Thanks.
Thank you. If there aren't any questions, are there comments? Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, convener, and thanks everybody. There's a huge amount of information in the reports before us, and probably there was a lot more questions, but thanks to the presentation from everybody, a lot of those have been answered. So I'd just like to thank you all for all the hard work. Thank you.
And Councillor Meehan?
Again, I would like to thank the officers for this report. It is excellent to see the good, very good, and indeed excellent evaluations. So well done to everyone. Could I also just add that if there's more officers to talk, that they remind the page number for me to follow. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, mine was a question, if that is okay. I thought we were going to move on to kind of any other questions that were kind of relevant to the report. If I can be very quick, if not, I can offline.
No, carry on.
Yeah, it was just with regards to where in the committee cycle the anti-bullying policy renewal and refresh would perhaps be presented to us. I just wondered if I have a bit of an indication of a timeline.
Thanks, Councillor Speed. So the work to review the anti-bullying policy is in the plan for the whole of this year. Whether the update evaluation could be written in time for the last Children and Learning Committee for the summer, I'm honestly not sure. We'll work at the pace of our, we're really keen that children and young people get involved in this, so when we're asking people to get involved, we'll work at their pace, and obviously our school staff too. So although we will write an evaluation plan of how we think it will be carried out, we won't cut it short. I'm not wanting to commit, because if it carries on into next year, then I just think it's important to get everybody's opinion. Thank you.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, convener, and hello everybody. Again, I would like to say, as not a substantive member of this group, I've stood in on occasion, and it's a pleasure. I had some questions at the pre-agenda with my group, and I did say that I wouldn't bother asking if they were answered without me asking. Well, that's happened, so that's why I'm not saying so much. But I would like to endorse what Councillor Whiteside said, and that it is very interesting reports, easily understood. But I would say one thing: it's honest, and long may it be so. Should never shy away from things, ever. And that's why I was asking questions earlier, and I didn't need to ask them today. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. And Councillor Gregg?
Thank you, Convener. Like Councillor Speed, I wasn't quite aware that we'd moved from onto general questions after we'd spoken to the individual officer. So if it's okay to ask a question, I'd like to. My question's specifically around the attainment, which I can see there's obviously a lot of work being done on that. I read recently that the majority of our secondary schools are in the bottom 20% for attainment in the whole of Scotland. And reading through the reports and listening to what some of the officers have said, it's clear there's a lot of work to try and improve that. However, it seems that quite a lot of that work is going to be funding led. At the end of specific funding for things, then is there a risk that after all this good work that's going to be about to be done and to improve the attainment, that once that funding comes to a stop, we're going to drop back down the attainment levels and be back in the bottom 20%?
Thank you, Councillor Gregg. And Councillor Gregg, I am assuming that you're referring to the article in the Courier yesterday.
Yes, and also in the Times newspaper as well.
Personally, I was disappointed to see the article in the press yesterday ranking schools according to how many hires, how many of the leavers achieved 5 or more passes for SQE hires. You'll have heard me in this committee before speak about all learning being accredited equally, and I would term hires as traditional or academic qualifications. And you know that in Angus we go across the whole suite of SCQF. We have really embraced the foundation apprenticeship route. So the use of this measure in isolation does not credit our young people who choose to leave school at the end of S4 or at the end of S5 who may not have chosen to study 5 hires and to go on to continue their learning elsewhere rather than in their school for 6 years. It also indeed doesn't credit those young people for whom achieving, for example, 4 hires was a massive achievement for them and allowed them to progress to the next stage of their learning. It doesn't accredit those who left school having been successful at level 4 or level 5, because hires are level 6. And again, that may have reflected great personal achievements for them at that time. And it certainly is not reflective of those who were successful in achieving individual milestones, depending on their level of need. I would ask that elected members consider any information about the attainment of our school leavers in a more relevant context through the use of the virtual comparator in Insight, which measures our school leavers with other learners across the country with similar characteristics, better capturing the differences in school contexts. It really isn't helpful to view one measure in isolation or in a way that offers no consideration of the context of the schools with regards to the numbers of young people with additional support needs or the socio-economic factors affecting the area in which that school serves. And finally, I'd like to say about the article, I wonder how many of us sitting in this room today left school with 5 or more hires. And I'm not expecting anybody in here to answer that. But it's just worth thinking about, because that's what that article was about. It was about a very finite measure. And to answer your question about the funding, of course, the SAC funding is, we never got SAC funding before. Some other local authorities across the country did and we didn't. So it's great for us to have it, and it is for additionality. That's very important to remember. So we never had the education officers that are working on the homeschool engagement to do with attendance. We didn't have them. So we were allowed to spend the money on something that was additional. When the funding goes away, we won't have that additional funding. But I hold a huge budget. Those of you that come to budget setting know that. And it's my job to prioritise that budget And quite honestly, I can sit here today and say, if those attendance officers prove to be incredibly successful and really pushed our attainment up, it would be my job and my officer's job to look at our budgets and decide whether we could fund that. Now, we couldn't fund that and continue to fund everything else, but that's the same with any budget, I think. It's about prioritising the need and putting the money where it is best used. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kelly. Councillor Cheap.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Hopefully you can hear me all right, and it's been breaking up for me here. I would like to take Bill's focus to of the education plan. It's page 45 of our papers. That it mentions 32.3% of children and young people in Scotland have additional support needs. The percent in Angus would be I didn't pick up that, and unless I've missed it, it'd be quite good to have that as a comparative. But bearing in mind, I think we all recognise the pressure that ASN is under in Angus across primary and secondary education. And my question really to Kelly is really looking at, I mean, I echo the wish that's in item 5B of that report on the stretch aims for ASN, but we all want that, but do we feel we have the resource we have the resource at the moment or in the future that's going to be able to allow us to attain that stretch?
Are you going to, is it Audrey?
I'm quite happy to answer it. And again, I guess this answer is related to my last answer. The education budget is what the education budget is. You know, every year, and we're doing it at the moment as part of the financial process, I work with my team to look at our budget and to consider any budget pressures that we may have in the future. A consideration of ASN need and the increase in that need is always part of that discussion and will feature in the budget issues in our papers. So unless the funding is increased, our ASN budget is the way the ASN budget is, or we decide across our secondary budget, our primary budget, or our early years budget that money can be realigned. I think that what we do in Angus, in fact I know that what we do in Angus is use our resource and most importantly probably, we don't just do what we've always done. We are incredibly data-driven in education, and probably even more so in Angus than many other local authorities. We evaluate, and Audrey's already given you an update on the ASN review. We're not doing the ASN review for the sake of doing an ASN review. We are to improve our service to children and young people and families. We think that what we do at the moment is good, but good's never good enough. So, you know, it is about, and I get the point that you're trying to make, Councillor Cheap, but it is about using the resource that we've got and using it to best value, and we'll always do that. Thank you.
Councillor Gavin Nicholl.
Thank you, Convener. A different tack here. Senior school pupils that are eligible for free school dinners, what percentage don't take up the offer, and why do you think it is?
I'm going to ask Beth to answer that. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you. I'm just frantically scrolling through the papers to see where I have got that data. If I can't find it, I'll provide after the meeting. But in terms of why young people don't take up the offer, it's for a range of reasons. And a lot of it comes down to personal choice and wanting to go off school premises with their peers plays a massive role. And that is a pattern that we've seen post-COVID, in particular with secondary school meals. We have done engagement with learners in secondary schools to understand a bit more about what their asks are in terms of the meal service. And so we are looking at putting a pre-order app in place, which is similar to what quite a few fast food establishments would have. So we're becoming a bit more aligned to the 21st century. There is also the element of the nutritional guidelines, which are in place for a reason, but we know that they do choose people to not take a school meal because they would prefer to go somewhere else and have a ham and cheese toastie is sometimes what comes up for us. So there are a range of different reasons. We are working really closely with Tayside Contracts to try and promote uptake, and the information I have for this current school year and indeed this financial year is starting to look more positive in terms of meal uptake. So we'll be bringing some more information along with the performance report that comes in April to this committee. So I hope to have a better picture for you then. But I'll come back to you with the exact percentages, if that's okay.
I was concerned with the kids that were eligible for the free meals, and there was maybe some kind of stigma against them going forward.
I'm happy to confirm that there is no way of somebody knowing. So the systems we have in place would not give away that anybody is eligible for a free school meal because we use a cashless system.
Okay, are there any other comments? Councillor Brace.
Yes, I just find this, when we see these reports coming forward, as we do, I'm always reminded that we're a fairly small local authority population-wise, but we're big geographically, and I think we have 8 secondary schools. And all these schools have different needs because of their geography, but also within the schools there's a whole range of pupils with all different backgrounds and all different needs. And I just think the sheer amount of thought that goes into all this never fails to stagger me. I think this report is very well laid out. Another thing I really like about this is that we're all, most of us anyway, we're sitting around the table and we've got the officers in the same physical space as us, and I think that's really important and greatly appreciated. The other thing I wanted to say was that I agree wholeheartedly and entirely with what Kelly McIntosh just said regarding attainment. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Brace. Yeah, I think throughout the whole report, you can see the huge amount of work, the huge amount of collaboration that goes on within our schools, within all the settings, but also out with Dundee and Angus College, with the University of Dundee, with the NHS Tayside, and on it goes. So, and most importantly, with parents and students themselves. So I want to thank all the staff in all the settings, because a huge amount is being asked of them and they are coming up to the mark. So thank you so much. Can we agree the recommendations? There's 4 recommendations. Notes the progress summarised. Considers and comments. I think we have done that. Approves the updates. We approve that, and requests the Director of Education to bring forward an evaluation report at this time next year. Do we agree these? Agree. Thank you very much. So we will go on to 5, the Scottish Recommended Allowance for Kinship and Foster Carers. And Catherine's going to introduce this for us. Thank you. Just wait until Councillor Meakin's. Oh, sorry, Councillor Meakin's going. Right, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm bringing this report to you today following an endorsement by COSLA Least this year of a Scottish recommended allowance for eligible kinship and foster carers. The report's asking members to note that there will be additional funding provided by Scottish Government in due course to implement the recommended allowance, and we're asking authority to implement that recommended allowance now by uplifting the portion of our allowances locally that are currently below that recommended minimum allowance, and by backdating that entitlement to the 1st of April, which is consistent with COSLA's endorsement. Separately, the report also asks for authority for us to undertake a fuller review of our current internal structure of allowances payable across all kinship and foster carers, with a view to improving the alignment with the nationally agreed allowance structure, and we would address that through the budget setting process and agreement with members in due course. Both myself and Peter McDonnell are happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. there any questions on this? Councillor Speed.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wondered what engagement locally will take place with foster and kinship carers, just to ensure that there is a full understanding of the types of needs that they have, and perhaps changing needs as well, given cost of living pressures, just to help inform that restructure.
I'd be part of our review process that Catherine just mentioned. There is a bit of work for us to do on one part of the new Scottish recommended allowance. We pay higher than what is recommended. In other areas we're a bit lower. There's also 3 age ranges rather than the 4 that ourselves and a number of other local authorities have. So we've got a bit of work to do to kind of work that out and how we approach that, because we think it probably would make sense to go to the 3, although we would obviously want to actively engage with carers about that as well. More recently, we've undertaken a review of our kinship service, so we have a lot of information from that engagement with kinship carers that we will help inform the wider review. And it had actually been on our radar to have a look at our fees and allowances and review them on the back of a report that came out last year from Fostering Network. So this has been work that has been in the offing for a wee while, albeit we're taking it forward a bit more rapidly with the decision from COSLA and from leaders more recently.
Okay, Councillor Speed.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. I think this is very important, and it's great that it's come forward so quickly after the COSLA decision. So thank you for getting the paper in on time for this. Any comments? Is this a question, Councillor Clark? Comment? Yeah, sure.
It's a wee bit of a broad statement, but I'll not take up too much time. In my career, I worked a lot with teenagers. A lot of them would be described now as neurodiverse, and we have to deal with all sorts within our educational departments and nursery straight the way through, and it's really good that we've discovered, or at least made known, what young people are going through when they try to fit in. I remember trying to fit in at school, and that wasn't easy. So insofar as the people who take these bairns into their homes as their kinship carers, again, I worked with very small children in a homestart setting, so had absolutely hands-on experience. If ever you've sat in a room where bairns are about to be taken into care, you only have to do that once to know how awful, sad, terrible that is. And you get people coming up, maybe distant relatives, knowing that these bairns are going to be okay, with all the frailties that they have, everything that's ever happened to them. So if we can make their lives a wee bit easier, just a few more spends on these bairns to get them on a wee holiday and things, let's just do it. So I commend this, convener, and I'm absolutely happy to do so, and I'm quite full of emotion.
Oh, thank you very much. Has anybody else got any comments to make? Councillor Melville?
Yes, thanks, convener. I think this is really, really positive, and I think particularly it's positive that we have the no detriment part in there, because obviously, as you highlighted, there are some age groups where we do already pay above this rate, and obviously what we will be doing is bringing up the ones where we don't in line and ensuring that no one who's currently paid more loses out, and I think that is an incredibly important part of this, so thanks very much.
Right, well, if there are no more questions or comments, we just go to the recommendations. Again, there's 4 of them. You have them in front of you. I don't think I'm going to go through them all because they're really quite long. Do we agree this report? Agreed. Thank you very much. And that is the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you, everybody. And thank you especially to the staff members who have come along and given us these really interesting presentations. Thank you.
John, can we stop the live stream, please?